All right, good afternoon. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. Happy Friday. Today is a good day for the United Nations and for the international community and our humanitarian colleagues. The Secretary General is delighted by the decision of the Nobel Committee to award this year's Nobel Peace Prize to the UN World Food Programme. He warmly congratulated David Beasley, WFP's executive director, and the entire staff of the World Food Programme and the UN family. The agency says, WFP is the world's first responder on the front lines of food insecurity. Adding that the Secretary General added that he has seen our World Food Programme in the most remote and dangerous locations, serving the most vulnerable of this world with enormous courage, dedication, and competence. In a world of plenty, it is unconscionable that hundreds of millions go to bed hungry each night. Millions more are now on the precipice of famine due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Secretary General added. We know that achieving zero hunger is an imperative for peace. A hungry world is not a peaceful world, he concluded. Also this morning, in a tweet, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, warmly saluted David Beasley and our WFP colleagues. She said the Nobel Peace Prize recognizes their tireless efforts to ensure children and families have access to life-saving sustenance. The Secretary General's message and his video message has been distributed to you, and of course we all add our congratulations to WFP and the team. This morning, the Secretary General spoke at by video, live video link at the second high-level event on mobilizing with Africa as part of the annual meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The Secretary General said that since the beginning of the crisis, African countries and the African Union have shown commendable leadership and unity in response to the pandemic. He stressed that the international community must continue to show commitment to Africa's health and well-being. The Secretary General added that the pandemic has resulted in acute liquidity constraints for African countries that without bold measures could spiral into a solvency crisis. He called on development partners to broaden the eligibility of the G20 debt service suspension initiative that includes all highly indebted and vulnerable countries that have been adversely affected by the emergency, and also urged developed countries to support liquidity and sustainability facility and to support efforts to prioritize green growth and environmental conservation. He also reiterated that the UN's solidarity with the people and governments of Africa at this pivotal moment for the continent. And this afternoon, the Security Council will hold close consultations on Cyprus. The Special Representative and head of the UN mission in Cyprus, Elizabeth Spehar, is expected to brief Council members. And just a note on Mali, to tell you that we welcome the liberation of the 4 hostages who arrived in Bamako late yesterday. We wish them well and as they reunite with their respective families. And just want to flag that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, today expressed alarm at the suffering of civilians as hostilities continue to widen along the line of contact in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone. She called for an urgent ceasefire due to the impact on civilians. Ms. Bachelet highlighted the deeply troubling reports that cluster munitions have also been used in the conflict area and voiced her concern on how the outbreak of renewed hostilities is posing a direct health threat amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Turning to Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the devastating rain that have left more than 875,000 people in need of aid and claimed more than 150 lives since July have started to subside. However, we warn that the full extent of the unprecedented flooding will only become evident in the months ahead. More than 10 million people risk contracting waterborne diseases following extensive damage to hundreds of water sources and the collapse of several thousand latrines. Malaria and other vector-borne diseases are expected to rise, and Sudan's already fragile food security situation will likely worsen due to the destruction of thousands of hectares of crops just before the harvest. As you know, Sudan is already facing a dire humanitarian need compounded by a deterioration of economic situation. Humanitarian organizations have reached 400,000 people to date, but low funding is hampering aid workers' capacity. overall, the humanitarian appeal in Sudan has received less than $1.6 billion requested. And an update on what our colleagues around the world are doing to address the pandemic. Today from Malawi, the UN team, led by the resident coordinator Maria José Torres Macho, is supporting efforts to save lives, protect livelihoods, and leave no one behind in the recovery process. The team has mobilized more than $70 million in funding. We also have opened a COVID-19 treatment center, set up 16 mobile isolation units, and trained more than 9,000 health workers to boost treatment capacity and reach more than 80% of the population to take steps to prevent the spread of the virus. Through its Staff Solidarity Fund, the UN team also contributed protective equipment to frontline workers, and they're also supporting the design of a national socioeconomic recovery plan and is providing seeds to 300,000 families ahead of the upcoming lean seasons, while supporting schools' reopening process by providing food for 600,000 children. And turning to the UN efforts just a further update on the same issue from our colleagues at UNIFIL in Lebanon. The contingents there have donated a wide range of medical supplies to local communities in southern Lebanon. In Mariayoun, peacekeepers provided first aid kits, antiviral drugs, and other medicines to a public hospital. Entire peacekeepers donated medicines and other medical supplies to Red Crescent, Red Cross facilities. And the International Organization for Migration today called for effective global cooperation to help at least 2.75 million migrants who are stranded around the world due to COVID-19 restrictions, including border measures and nationwide lockdowns. And a couple of days to note. Today, first of all, is World Post Day. So send a letter to your parents or loved ones. In a message for the day, the Secretary General offered his sincere thanks to the world's postal workers who have continued to deliver during days of trial and challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. He said that these workers have risked much and they have delivered more than just mail. The Secretary General noted that postal workers have launched innovative community services tending to older people and those who are socially isolated. They have delivered life-saving medicines and equipment and helped to ensure that food parcels and funds reach those in need. The Secretary General highlighted their dedication, innovation, and creativity has undoubtedly saved lives. Tomorrow, 40th anniversary of the adoption of the Convention on Prohibition or Restriction of the Use of Certain Conventional Weapons, which may be deemed to be excessively injurious or have indiscriminate effects, otherwise known as CCW. To mark this milestone, the Secretary General said in a message that the CCW has proven to be an effective and dynamic instrument. He says it is an essential humanitarian arms control instrument to protect civilians from harm caused by conventional weapons. He urges the high contracting parties to work together to keep up the momentum and pave the way for the Convention to remain a strong, agile instrument in the pursuit of disarmament. Tomorrow is also Mental Health Day, and the Secretary General warns that every 40 seconds, someone dies from suicide, and depression is now recognized as a leading cause of illness and disability among children and adolescents. And now he adds that we are now seeing the consequences of the pandemic on people's mental well-being, and this is just the beginning. As you remember, we did put out a policy paper on that issue. And on that note, I think, just forgot to read out a note on Burkina Faso, where our humanitarian colleagues tell us that humanitarian needs are increasing following a rise in intercommunal tensions interwoven with security-related protection concerns. From January to the end of last month, the number of people in need of humanitarian assistance had increased by 30%, from 2.2 million to 2.9 million. Food insecurity is rising at alarming levels. 3.4 million people across the country face critical food shortages. Despite the high level of need, humanitarian organizations are saving lives and have reached 1.8 million people since the beginning of the year. The humanitarian response plan, sadly, is only 38% funded. Sir.
We have seen the statement from the Secretary-General on the Nobel Peace Prize, and we've seen a very short social video filmed on the 38th floor. Does he have any plans to talk to us, a stakeout or something on this important moment?
We're working on that, I know, unlikely today, but we're keeping a bit of hope.
Does the Secretary-General have a plan to go to Oslo for the ceremony?
I think that's very premature. First of all, I don't know if there will be a ceremony.
Well, apparently there will be a reduced ceremony.
Okay. I mean, I know you're better informed about this ceremony than I am. Second, the invitees and guests are really those of the World Food Program.
Does the Secretary-General have any plans to travel anywhere anytime soon?
At this point, there are no plans to travel, given the state of the world and the risks that entails for the Secretary-General to travel. But however, we are constantly looking at possibilities, at opportunities, but there are no plans as of right now.
The reason I asked that question is Mr. Beasley, you mentioned Burkina Faso. He was there, and then he was also in Nigeria. So he is travelling out of Rome, but it seems no officials of any note seem to be making any important visits from New York. Is that because of the quarantine regulations in New York?
I can only speak for the Secretary-General. Obviously, we've seen heads of agencies out of Geneva and out of Rome travel. They, by the very nature of their job, have a smaller footprint when they travel. But at this point, there are no plans for the Secretary-General. And also, the Secretary-General has been able to deliver speeches and conduct diplomacy via video. Heads of humanitarian agencies have also a different responsibility in terms of being on the front lines of where humanitarian aid is delivered.
You say you only speak for the Secretary-General, but you speak for the UN as a whole, but you also speak for all the officials in the Secretariat.
Sorry, no, I'm saying there's
Mr. Lowcock would normally do a great deal of travel. Mr. Lacroix would normally, Ambassador DiCarlo, and none of them seem to be doing any travel. And I want to know if that's specifically because of the problems of the restrictions in the host country, the quarantine restrictions. Are they limiting the work of the UN?
Look, the COVID-19 and the situation here obviously has an impact on our travel. The fact that anyone returning from travel would have to quarantine for 2 weeks because we honor the restrictions, recommendations put forward by New York City and by New York State has an impact on people's travel. Often senior officials don't travel alone. They have to travel with one or two other people, sometimes with security. So it has a whole impact on staff. So, it's always a risk and reward. But obviously, I think every UN entity has a need to respect and honor the restrictions put in place by the COVID-19 situation in their home base.
Last follow-up, I promise.
And then we'll open up to others.
No,
maybe.
I agree. But just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
has the UN applied for humanitarian visits that got conducted by senior officials from New York, for example, for any exemption on humanitarian grounds?
No.
For Mr. Lowcock, for example, to travel if he wanted to travel.
I know, but we do, I think it's very important that the United Nations in New York be good neighbors, right? And the Secretary-General has made it clear that he's not going to ask for an exemption. He's traveled twice outside the country, as you know, since the pandemic lockdown, to visit his family. He did exactly what he was told, which is he stayed home for 2 weeks. And every other UN official would do that as well. Madame, and then
Steph, I would like to know the state of the pandemic in South Sudan, and is the mission able to do its work?
Yes, the mission continue. I mean, the mission, like all other missions, continue to do their work, adapted, of course, to the local conditions, which has had an impact. The mission itself has had, since the beginning, I think 115 cases in South Sudan. Out of 115, they were 5 fatalities. So all the others have recovered. It has an impact, but I think as we've pointed out, the mission has continued to do its work, deploying forward bases, deploying peacekeepers when needed, continuing to deliver humanitarian aid, often at great risk. We had WFP barge convoy being attacked with contractors being shot at. So like everywhere, the UN is continuing to deliver on its mandate, but obviously adapting that delivery to the situation on the ground, whether it's Khartoum, whether it's Juba or New York. Not that we deliver humanitarian aid in New York.
Thanks,
Don't
Steph.
misinterpret me.
Sorry, on the meeting, Cyprus meeting in the afternoon at the Security Council. It would be nice to have a virtual stakeout with Elizabeth Sphere, especially it's a closed meeting. Is she planning any, or would you make such a request for us? And also today, the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia are having talks in Russia. Did the Secretary General talk to any of the ministers ahead of the meeting in Russia?
He's spoken, as you know, he's spoken to both leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan. We have stayed in touch with the various parties, both at the country level and other levels. We've also stayed in touch with the Minsk groups. We very much welcome the efforts and the meeting that will take place, and we hope that it would lead to, first and foremost, a cessation of hostilities. I think we've seen the very disturbing reports of civilians continuing to be killed or wounded. I just highlighted today the High Commission for Human Rights' own concern for the use of cluster ammunition in the conflict zone. Oh, sorry, we have people on screen. Now that we have people in the room, I forget about those joined by video. If you have a question, Edie, please, sorry.
Thank you, Steph. I was also going to ask about the Armenia-Azerbaijan meeting in Moscow. But are there any follow-ups on what Martin Griffiths is doing and what Stephanie Williams is doing to follow up on ceasefire peace efforts in both Yemen and Libya?
No, they're both continuing to stay in close touch with their respective parties. My understanding, and I will check, that Mr. Griffiths may have some travel coming up in the not too distant future, but we'll try to get something a little bit more granular for you. Okay, who else has a question? Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Yesterday, the FBI unveiled a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Miss Whitmer. Persons were arrested in what it's called domestic terrorism. Is there any statement to condemn internally domestic homegrown terrorism?
We've had I have no comment to say on this. It's my understanding, and from what I read in the press, it's being very well handled by the national law enforcement authorities. Yes, please, Dulcie.
I wanted to go back to the World Food Program. Do you know offhand if the funding by the U.S. to the agency has remained at its levels under the Trump administration, whether the levels have gone down?
I think you'd have to check with WFP. I do not believe the levels have gone down. I know the U.S. continues to be a very strong donor and the leading donor, if I'm not misspeaking. Though I don't want to speak on behalf of WFP, but my understanding is that it has not gone down. But you should check with. I can give you the name of their person here.
Thanks.
Okay. Wave on the screen or raise your hand in the room. Excellent. All right.